everybody. Welcome to another episode on the Mindful Conversationals podcast channel. And today I'm honored to be joined by Sadhvi Bhagawati Saraswati, a global spiritual leader, best-selling author, and long-time resident of Parmarth Niketan in Rishikesh, India. She's joining us all the way from India. And Sadhviji's journey is a remarkable one, from growing up in Hollywood and completing a PhD in psychology at Stanford to finding profound healing and purpose on the banks of the sacred Ganga. So this conversation is designed as a reflective and heartfelt dialogue, exploring Sadhviji's spiritual journey from her early life and personal transformation to her global leadership in interfaith collaboration, sustainability, and sacred service. So this dialogue will explore what it means to live a life of devotion, responsibility, and compassion in today's world, offering insight, especially for young people and interfaith practitioners navigating questions of purpose, service, and belonging. So, Jai Gurudev, Namaste, Sadhvi Bhagawati Saraswati. It's so great to see you again.
Wonderful to be with you.
I'm so happy. We last met in Manresa in 2022 at the Religious Peace International Conference. And what a beautiful journey that was. You know, we interviewed you. We walked together on the Camino. We went to St. Ignatius of Loyola's cave and meditated. And even too, we visited the amazing Antonio Gaudi's church in Barcelona, where we had such a beautiful conversation. So thank you for being here.
Absolutely, it was. It was such a beautiful time together. I have such powerfully positive and sacred memories of that time and coming together with leaders of all of the different religions on that sacred journey. It was a very, very beautiful lifetime highlight.
It was definitely for me too. So Sadhviji, I want to go into your journey, right, a bit, and so my listeners can get to know you. And I know that you live such a unique life, you know, you started off from Hollywood, and it was at Stanford, and then through trauma and healing, you became this global spiritual leader, a powerful spiritual woman that we've come to love and respect, right? So I love to begin with not what you do, but who you are and how you became this along the way. And would you share with us your transformational journey and how it unfolded from Hollywood to the banks of the sacred Ganga in Rishikesh?
Absolutely. It's been really a journey of grace, a journey of the power of what we call Sankalp Shakti, the power of a vow, the power of intention when it's aligned with our highest purpose, the power of a spiritual connection, the power of surrender. I came to India at the age of 25 with a backpack. I was not someone who was religious. I was not even one of those people who say, well, I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual. I was an academic. I was a scientist. I had graduated undergrad from Stanford, and I was getting a PhD in pediatric neuropsychology, so the brains of children. And that pretty much filled up the plate of my life, my relationships, my social life, my emotional life. And so the fact that I was not spiritual or religious was not even something that occurred to me. But I came to India with a backpack on a break from my PhD program because I loved to travel. I was an avid traveler. I had traveled across Europe, throughout England, across the US and South America. And when India was suggested, you know, it's so embarrassing actually to admit 30 years later, but when India was suggested, I didn't even know anything about India. I certainly knew nothing about the religion, the faith, the spiritual culture of it. But what I did know is that I loved the food. I was a very strict vegetarian since childhood. And traveling across the world as a very strict vegetarian in places where you don't speak the language, you're not cooking for yourself, was always a huge challenge. And so I knew, well, at least in India, I'll be able to eat happily. So I agreed to come. But on the airplane to India, I had this beautiful moment with myself that I will always be so deeply grateful for. And it was a moment in which I said to myself, this makes no sense. You're traveling across the world to a country you know nothing about, that you're not particularly drawn to, where the only interesting and appealing factor is that you can get good Indian vegetarian food. But I was living in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I could get good Indian vegetarian food on my corner. So suddenly on that airplane, I realized this trip doesn't make any logical sense. And so I took a vow. And the vow was simply that I would keep my heart open. Because even though I wasn't spiritual, I always did believe in what I called a capital P plan, and therefore a capital P planner. So I said to myself, all right, there must be a reason I'm going, and I'm just not aware of it. So let me keep my heart open so that I can discover why this capital P planner is sending me across the world to this country I don't know anything about. And this was September of 1996. So there was no Google for us to access and say where to go, what to do. We had a 500-page Lonely Planet guidebook. And I opened it in Delhi and said, Rishikesh. I mean, it was just like that. It was relatively close to Delhi, only, a few hour drive. It had a beautiful river. It had mountains. I didn't know the Ganga River was sacred. I didn't know the Himalayas were sacred, but I was always a nature person. And so I felt like, river, mountains. And it's, a major yoga hub. It's now the yoga capital of the world. But even in those days, it was a major hub for yoga. And I was already a student of Hatha yoga. So it just seemed perfect. Relatively close to Delhi, a beautiful river, beautiful mountains, yoga, and a nice place to start the rest of our India journey. Now, looking over a guidebook in Delhi, choosing which hotel to stay in, they all basically sounded the same. AC, non-AC rooms, vegetarian restaurant. The entire city of Rishikesh is vegetarian. So every hotel, AC rooms, non-AC rooms, vegetarian restaurant. But, and this is why I say grace, in this area of Rishikesh, where Parmarth Niketan, the ashram that I now live at, where I've been for 30 years, the area where we are based is an area of Rishikesh called Swarg Ashram, which literally translates as the heavenly abode. But it's an area full of primarily just ashrams. Now, in recent years, there's lots and lots of hotels that have come up in this area as well. But 30 years ago, all of the hotels in Rishikesh were either across the river in the more downtown side of Rishikesh, or they were upriver in the Lakshmanjula area. But in this Swargashram area, there was only one hotel. Now, I didn't know all of this from our Lonely Planet guide, but when I opened it and looked for hotels without paying any attention to geography, because I didn't know it, one of the hotels was called the Green Hotel. Now, I was an avid environmentalist. I had actually organized the very first Earth Day at Stanford and had worked for Greenpeace. I was an avid environmentalist. And so I thought, Green Hotel, it sounded to me like it would be some kind of eco-friendly hotel or an eco-resort. And it never occurred to me that it would be just An regular hotel with its walls painted, a pastel-y color of green. But this is grace, because that one hotel in the area of town I needed to be so that I could find the ashram I was meant to live in was called the Green Hotel. It was the only hotel in this whole area. So I had said in Delhi, let's stay at the Green Hotel. Okay. So we come, put our bags in the hotel, and I said, I'm going to go put my feet in the river. And that was it. I was hot. I was tired. We had just arrived. The idea of sitting by the river after a hot, sweaty, crowded day of travel just felt really perfect and natural to me. I had no idea, again, that this river is the Mother Goddess, that this river is holy, is sacred, is the bestower of liberation. I just thought I'll sit by the river and freshen up. I get down to the banks of Ganga. And before I even get my feet in the water, I'm handed this extraordinary spiritual experience of being in the presence of the divine. And it began as I looked out over the sacred Ganges River. But it stayed with me as I turned my head. And it didn't matter what I was looking at. A family, a child, a telephone pole, a marble step, a tree. That presence of divinity, that pervasive presence of the divine was there. Just as powerfully in a telephone pole. It didn't matter what I looked at. Everything was divine. And it knocked me to the ground in tears. And at some point, I turned that vision inward. And I realized, oh my God, I'm not separate. I am one with that divine presence. Now, at 25, not only was I a non-religious, non-spiritual academic who by nature had a certain narrative and story and identification and role in all the ways that I understood myself. But I also was someone who, along with the blessings and the privilege and the prosperity and the opportunities, had also suffered very severe trauma. I had experienced severe sexual abuse, abandonment, and then the repercussions of that in a very severe eating disorder, depression in my adolescence and early 20s. So I had a whole host of self-identities. The one who had been abused, the one who had been abandoned, the bulimic, the one who struggled with depression, the one who had addiction, the one who had abandonment issues, all of these stories that we tell ourselves, along with the more generic, girl from Hollywood who has it all, A+ student, scientist, etc. And I had never doubted those. Those were the ways that I understood myself. Suddenly in that moment, that experience just wiped them all off. And it was this awareness of, oh my God, I am not the victim of this, the survivor of that, the one who looks like this, has achieved that, experienced this, struggles with that. I'm inseparable from that divine presence. There's no place I end. And that pervasive divinity begins. There's no place the universe ends and I begin. And the idea that I was divine, that I was not smart enough or good enough or pure enough or popular enough or successful enough or beautiful enough, or all of the things that we struggle with, especially in our youth, but throughout our life. The idea that that wasn't who I was had never occurred to me. I had never in 25 years had anyone say to me, by the way, you're not those grades you get. You're not your ranking in school. You are not your titles. You're not your degree. You're not what's happened to you. The idea was inconceivable to me. And yet there it was, as a palpable, felt sense experience that was more real than anything I had ever known, anything I had ever experienced. And it blew my heart open, blew my mind open, freed me in so many ways of so much of what I had previously thought, and just brought me into this extraordinary experience of oneness. And along with that, it gave me the awareness that this is where I was meant to be, that this was home. Exactly where, how, why, doing what, I had no idea. But it didn't matter. My brain, fortunately, for the next many days for sure, and actually several weeks, was rendered pretty nonverbal, pretty non-cognitive. For a long time, all I could say was just, oh my God, it's so beautiful. Oh my God, it's so beautiful, with tears streaming down my face. So the fact that I didn't logically know exactly where I would live, what I would do, why this was home, it didn't trouble me. I just knew that I had come home to my deepest self, and come home in the world to where I was meant to be. And it's been an extraordinary blessing. And just one last piece of the plot, and then we'll go on to your next question, or I'll take up our whole time just telling the story. Over the ensuing 7 to 10 days after that experience, I had another series of what, in retrospect, we could call a mystical experience, but I never would have used that word. Experiences like hearing a voice as I walked through the ashram that said, you must stay here. Experiences like literally getting my feet glued to the ground of the ashram. Experiences when I met His Holiness Puja Swami Chidanand Saraswati, the spiritual head, the president of Parmarth Niketan, who would later become my guru. These are experiences that, if I had not taken a vow to keep my heart open on the airplane, I worry that the academic scientist brain in me might have pushed away as unable to be verified empirically. And I therefore might have missed the very calling of my life. And that's why, to me, I say it's a story of grace, and it's a story of the power of a vow, because that vow kept pushing me as I heard a voice that said, you must stay here, and looked around and realized there was no one. It made me stay open, and it prevented me from just ignoring it and saying to myself, again, when I heard it the second time, nobody spoke, therefore no voice, I'm going to just pretend I didn't hear it. And it really called me to the truth of the moment, which was so vastly different from any truth I had ever known or any truth I ever could have imagined, that if I hadn't taken such a vow, I'm not quite sure where the academic in me would have gone. So I'm very, very grateful to have had that impulse to take that vow. And I'm very glad that I was so deeply committed to truth in my life that I wasn't going to let myself off the hook once I took the vow.
That is so beautiful. Wow. I really felt it. And I think where I really felt it was when you spoke about all the trauma that happened. And in that moment of divine grace and that moment of being touched by the divine, as you said, it brought you coming home to yourself. That's so beautiful. Because if you look at the world today, right, it's a world of fragmentation, especially with the youth, right? And when you're going through all those trauma or those incidents in your life, for you, that is your immediate reality. You can't see beyond that in that moment, you know? And then it's so beautiful when you talk about when you touch by the divine and you connect to that, you get to see and experience something more than your immediate circumstances. And so this brings me to my next question, right? What does feminine spiritual leadership look like in this century? I mean, you are such a beautiful, amazing, inspiring woman, right? And, there's like, especially for young women who are searching for meaning and purpose in this world, and there's a lot of distraction and noise in this world. What would you say that looks like feminine spiritual leadership in today's world?
Beautiful question, and it's really important. I think, to me, the Hindu tradition, the Sanatan Dharma tradition, has such a beautiful way of understanding this because we have such an emphasis on worship of the mother goddess, but the mother goddess in all of her forms. And to me, that's really the most powerful model for that leadership. Because, for example, during the 9 days of Navaratri, the 9 days dedicated to worship, celebration of the mother goddess, we worship 9 of her different forms. And there are forms that are, brahmacharini, and she's all in white, and she's this ascetic, renunciant kind of embodiment of just that purity, that angelic nature of, the one going to Lord Shiva. And then we have Mahakali, the embodiment of fierceness and ferocity, who takes darkness and demons and any of that nature in anyone and conquers it. And her images are with skulls, a necklace of skulls around her neck, and blood coming out of her mouth, and it's ferocious, it's fierce. And we have aspects of Goddess Saraswati, the goddess of wisdom, not book knowledge, wisdom, deep wisdom. We have Goddess Mahalakshmi, the goddess of abundance and prosperity, not cash, not bills, not money in the wallet, but real abundance, real prosperity, which is spiritual connection. So we have this incredible spectrum of, we have Skand Mata, Kartikeya's mother, holding the child in her arms and holding weapons in the other arms. And it's this beautiful embrace of the traditional, maternal, nourishing, nurturing aspect of femininity. Even the most stereotypical elements of that, like untouched purity. And then we have these elements of ferocity and fierceness. And I think that's what feminine leadership really needs to embody, is all of it. We went, in the pre-feminist movement, there were really very narrow visions of what a nice lady or good woman was like. And she was the proper wife and the proper mother. And she stayed home and took care of the home and did the laundry and raised the kids and had them all prim and proper when daddy came home. And she was prim and proper when daddy came home, and there was food on the table, and nothing wrong with that at all. It's a beautiful way of choosing that life if that's your dharma. But it's a very narrow definition of the spectrum of feminine leadership and feminine dharma. And we had, the vision of the pure girl, untouched, untouchable, just virginal purity. And again, beautiful and a narrow definition. And then with the feminist movement, sadly, we went in a way where it kind of pushed all of that aside and basically said, thou shalt not stay home. That is oppression, that is suppression. And women were pushed into a situation of basically proving that we could be just as good at being men as men are. And it became a matter of, we're not feminine, we're masculine. And in order to break that glass ceiling, we had to basically become men. And so we pushed all of that more traditional, stereotypical, and yet also very true aspects of femininity, of nurturing, of nourishing, of wanting to take care. We pushed that aside in favor of proving that we could be just as good CEOs or presidents as men could. And that was an important step, but it also was a very narrow definition, because equal doesn't mean same. And women being equal to men does not mean being just as good at being men as men are. It means in our femininity, in our different way of leading. It's equal, but different. And now, thankfully, I think we are really in a beautiful time, and there's still obviously a lot more work to be done, but entering into an equal but different aspect of feminine leadership that says we carry within us a different way of seeing the world. We carry within us different ways of interacting with others, much more collaborative, much more connected, much more focused on nourishing and nurturing. The maternal instincts in us, whether we've ever popped babies out of our womb or not, those maternal instincts in us, I think, give us a way of seeing the world, seeing other people's children, that is very different from the more masculine way of looking at the world. And there's the mama bear instinct of like, do not threaten my babies. And we can manifest that Durga energy, that Kali energy. And that's beautiful. And to remember that's not our only face. And to really be able to flow spaciously through the different aspects of the feminine, I think is really what feminine leadership is calling us to do, to remember our connection to creation, our connection to nourishing, nurturing, caregiving, that element within us that naturally sacrifices self for others without feeling like a martyr. Not because our culture tells us to, but because it's part of the package deal of having the chemistry that makes us mothers. If we didn't have that chemistry, mothers would just let their babies cry all night long because they didn't want to get out of bed. But because we have that in us, it's like, oh, I'll get up and feed the baby. Not because I'm a martyr, but because I'm a mother. And having that powerfully protective energy that enables 100-pound mothers to lift cars off of their newborns or carry their babies across mountains and villages overnight to get to the only hospital in the village in the morning because the baby's been feverish. And that power of do not stand in the way of protecting my child. And we need that today because all of the children of the world are our children. And this earth is our home. And the ferocity with which some of our embodiments of the divine feminine protect the creation with their weapons, with their swords, with their fierceness, with their strength, is also a critical energy for us to really channel and embody. So it's a yes and leadership, I think.
That's so beautiful. And especially the way you bring it back to the Divine Mother, and to connect to the Divine Mother, but also see that energy inside of us in bringing it into our daily actions, but also what we need to do as strong women in these spaces. And moving on to these spaces, right? Because I've met you in the interfaith space and I've met such beautiful, strong women in that space, like Dr. Azza Karam and many others. So I want to ask you the question that you move so fluidly between meditation halls and global policy platforms. And because this means you to be in the space to contribute whatever dharma or, as you said, the woman leadership that you need to be in these spaces, like UN spaces, the COP, and the G20s. So how do you maintain a spiritual depth while navigating these political and institutional environments? And what does the world of policy most need from the world of spirituality right now?
I think the world of policy needs spirituality desperately. It doesn't need more dogma. We don't need more walls or boundaries, but we definitely need more dharma, more compassion, more integrity, more accountability, more awareness of the interconnectedness, more awareness of the sanctity and sacredness of life, human life, of all humans, but also life of every species, life of this planet, life of the future, because the future is also sacred. And all of our spiritual traditions have teachings around the sacredness of life, teachings around the interconnectedness of life, teachings around compassion, around patience, around nonviolence, around truth. And we need to go back to those. So I think bringing spirituality into policy is critical. Again, as dharma, not dogma. It's not about a religion or religious beliefs that have become social norms for reasons of suppression and oppression and power and money, but deep core spiritual tenets. And for me, it's most definitely a challenge and a beautiful opportunity. I try to bring that spiritual voice into those places because for so many of the people sitting in those places, it's a day job. It's, something that pays the bills, and sure, it may be more meaningful than pumping gas, but it's not necessarily something that they all feel is a calling. Many do. And it's simply being something that, gives them a living does not by any means whatsoever means that it's not also their dharma. I know a lot of people in those spaces who are not necessarily spiritual leaders, but for whom being in that space really is a deep, deep spiritual calling. And that's beautiful, and that's exactly what we need. So it's not only the religious leaders or the renunciants or the monastics who are able to bring spiritual voices into those spaces, but I think that is a role that we tend to be brought into play, and I consider it a great honor and a great opportunity and a great responsibility to play that. Because when there isn't an institution or a boss that I am trying to make sure I please, trying to make sure I don't threaten, there's an ability to speak a truth, I think, that is of extraordinary power because you're not going to get fired. there's more of a responsibility to the Dharma. And again, I'm using that word very broadly, not only to refer to Sanatan Dharma, but all of the different spiritual paths, that aspect of our path of integrity, of compassion, of oneness, compared to a dogma. But that becomes our highest responsibility rather than to the title I have, the role I have, the salary I have, the boss I have, the institution I represent. And so for me, it's a huge honor, a beautiful opportunity, and a huge responsibility to really make sure every minute and every moment that I'm aligned, not to a vision of what am I going to get out of it based on what I say, who's going to like it, who's not going to like it, what other opportunities am I going to get, that none of that personal agenda, but just how can I, in my commitment, a lifelong commitment, to being a spiritual seeker and a spiritual leader, teacher, wherever the opportunities arise, how can I step into this moment full of presence, full of that presence of the divine that is compassionate, that is peaceful, that is all embracing, that is love. So for me, that's the calling, and to have all of these different opportunities to do that, regardless of what the actual title or topic is an amazing opportunity. And to be able to speak from a spiritual perspective, from a dharmic perspective, on everything ranging from climate change to gender equality to sustainability to water to sanitation to hygiene to interfaith harmony, is just a huge, huge blessing.
That's so beautiful. And I can completely resonate, because also being as a young woman in that spaces and learning as well and seeking as well on what peace could really be in this world. I've also experienced that, when you're in that space, you speak from a place of truth. And it's not about your personal agendas, but what you are called to do in that moment in service to the world or to the divine. And that's very beautiful. And so this brings me to my next question, because I know that you were a co-president of the Religions for Peace. And, as I said, you stood on global platforms like the United Nations COP and the Parliament of World Religions. And I'm sure you witnessed interfaith dialogue at highest levels, right? So I want to know from your experience, what does authentic interfaith leadership truly require in today's world? And also beyond like symbolic dialogue, with regards to spiritual maturity and, you see the structural shifts that are necessary for interfaith collaboration to move into conversation and from conversation into real transformation, especially in addressing things like conflict and climate crisis and the inequality. How do you see this? How do you see that interfaith dialogue needs to be today in today's world for real transformation and for authentic interfaith leadership?
Beautiful question. My dad is a divorce attorney, and he's going to be 80 in July. So he spent more than 50 years divorcing people. And he has a beautiful teaching that I share with couples who are getting married. And it's the distillation of a lifetime of watching what happens when relationships fall apart. And the teaching is very simple. He says, when you get married, you've really only got two choices. You can either be right or you can stay married. And that if you are committed and attached to being right, you can kiss your marriage goodbye. And if you realize that what matters most is your marriage, then you let go of being right. And he jokingly frequently will tell typically young men, just because he's a man, who are getting married, that, you've been right for the last time in your life. Get over it. Now just be happily married. And that pertains as a core focus, not only to interpersonal relationships like a marriage, but also to our global relationships. When we walk into dialogue, most of us, especially if there's conflict, we come in rooted, anchored, grounded in our own position. We are right. And as long as our most important agenda item is to get the other guy or the other gal or the other group to agree that we are right, we can kiss peace goodbye. If we walk in with the highest agenda item being peace between us, because then we're going to be able to have a ripple impact of peace in our communities, assuming, of course, that you've got impactful high-level leaders in those dialogues. The highest goal has to be, how do we bring peace to this relationship so that through us, peace can ripple into our communities? But in order to do that, I think the rule is the same, is that we have to be prepared to sacrifice being right in order to be peaceful. And that doesn't mean that we give up on critical and important aspects of, our rights, our nation, our, sovereignty or things like that. But what it means is just in our priority of focus. What do we walk into that dialogue with? And sadly, a lot of us walk in with prepared speeches of basically why we are right. And while the other guy is speaking, we are really busy rehearsing our own speech or on our phones or thinking of all of the rebuttals that we will give to what the other person is saying. Whereas really what we need to do is walk into those spaces to listen. What is actually needed in order to bring peace here? What can we agree upon? How can we find the humanity in another? One of my dear friends is a scientist named Dr. Bruce Lipton, who's quite famous. You've probably heard of him. And he's a biologist who is a biology professor and has now for the last many decades actually brought spirituality into biology, and he talks about the transformation, and it's a whole other topic. But I mention it because one of his areas of expertise is on maintaining love in relationships. So my dad gets them divorced, and Bruce is writing books and giving seminars on what to do if you are struggling and feel like you might be on the verge of divorce. And one of the techniques that he and his wife use that I love and I share with people all over the world is he says, whenever we're fighting, typically when we fight, it's all about getting the other person to listen and understand me. Like, you've got to understand where I'm coming from, and then you will agree that I am right. He said, but that never happens. Because we each have these core beliefs of our rightness and from where we're coming. And what matters more, just like my dad says, is that peace, that connection. And so what he and his wife do whenever they have conflict is, he said, we never talk about it in the beginning. We never begin by talking. We begin simply by sitting next to each other on the couch, allowing just the outside of our thighs, just tiny, to touch each other. We just sit there on the couch for 15, 20 minutes, no speaking, just this tiny touch of body to body. And he said, what happens is slowly, the energetic frequency of the connection brings us both individually and collectively back into our bodies, back into our hearts, back into a remembrance of our connection. And then frequently there's nothing needed to be spoken about at all. And if there is, at least we go into a conversation from a place of remembrance and connection rather than a place of separateness. So obviously, I would not suggest that, religious leaders come into a dialogue and, sit on a couch touching each other. I think that would probably be seen as a little too touchy-feely for most policymakers. But the core teaching is the same, which is we need to come in and remember that our highest goal is to see, recognize, acknowledge, and remember the sacredness of each other's humanity, the sacredness of each other's children, the love that each other feels in their hearts for their children, and the awareness that each of us is walking into that room hoping to be able to bring back peace. And if you don't walk into those rooms hoping to bring back peace, and all you walk in is hoping to pummel the other into submission, well, then you're not qualified to be in an interreligious dialogue, because you're not looking to dialogue, you're looking to dominate. If what we're really looking for is not domination, but dialogue that actually is going to bring about a resolution, we have to keep peace as our highest goal and be personally prepared to let go of making the other guy agree I'm right, making them understand where we're coming from. Not everybody's going to understand you, and that's okay. As long as they can respect and recognize the sanctity of you as a being on this planet, and your right, your inherent right to live a safe life, to live a life with access to food and water, shelter, education, healthcare, right to worship as you want, right to love whom or as you want. As long as we're able to recognize each other's inherent right to that based on the very sanctity of each other as humans on this planet, that's enough. And so what I've seen is that where we walk in looking to dominate or make the other person understand, whether it's interpersonal on a marriage or interreligious, we don't get very far. If we walk in with the highest goal being, how can we walk out of this room as brothers, as sisters, in peace, back together? We've got a much, much better chance.
That is so beautiful. I think I've learned something very deep here today. Because as you said, it's not about just reading your speech on the phone, right? And usually everybody's like so nervous in doing this in the interfaith space, but it's about actually being present and listening. And I think that's very powerful. And it's something we don't practice much, And I think it's very beautiful how you brought it on a global level back to the micro level of just like your personal engagement with people. And in terms of how you address conflict in your daily life, as it's the same thing as how you address conflict on a national platform as well. So I think that's very beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And being in awareness of the time right now, so I'm going to ask you my last question. And this one is because you spoke so beautifully and so deeply of Mother Ganga and how she transformed your life and your spiritual journey and the connection you felt to her, right? And you spoke of Mother Ganga as a living divinity, and and I know you're involved in the WASH Alliance project, the global interfaith one. How do you see environmental crisis as ultimately a spiritual crisis? Like, how does this reverence, like what we have from Mother Ganga, transform activism into sacred action?
Beautiful, beautiful. so the creation is sacred. In the Sanatan Dharma tradition, we believe that it is not just created by the Creator, but that it is created of the Creator. We believe that all aspects of creation, from every blade of grass to every drop of water, to every tree, to every being, we believe they are all sacred, and that same divinity, that same consciousness that is our highest, deepest, truest nature also pervades them and is also their highest, deepest nature. We vary in our abilities to see that, understand that, reflect that, interact with that, but that ultimately that consciousness, that divinity, that source, that presence is the same in all of us. Even in traditions that don't necessarily believe like that, even if we simply believe the creation is created by the Creator, well, nonetheless, it's sacred. If your kid comes home with even, scribbles on construction paper from nursery school that look like nothing, but they come home and they present that construction paper, scribble to you, well, that is sacred, and you're going to stick it up on the fridge, and you may even frame it and put it on the wall. Why? Because you love the artist. The artwork may be nothing, the scribbles of a 2-year-old. But to you, it is sacred because you love the artist. And every time you look at those scribbles, you smile because you remember your child. And in the same way, as people of faith, when we look at the creation, even if we don't necessarily see it as divine, well, certainly we should see it as the product of the creation of the artwork of our beloved divine. All of the religions I know of speak about God the Creator. So this is God's artwork. Can you imagine how your child would feel if you took their construction paper piece of art and tore it up? Said, this is useless, worthless. Used it as kindling for your fire. Oh, it's just something for me to use and abuse and discard. Can you imagine? Can you imagine if they were sitting on the living room floor creating something beautiful, and you went in and vacuumed it all away? They'd be heartbroken. In the same way, I feel like we have a spiritual responsibility to treat this creation with reverence, with love, with care, because we love the Creator. And so whether it's the water, whether it's the soil, whether it's the trees, whether it's all of the other species here, no religion that I'm aware of says, oh, well, God created those people, but not those people. Those people were created, they sprouted up out of the earth accidentally. God the Creator, God the Creator, God the Creator. So there is that aspect of recognizing the Creator in the creation. So for me, the earth is not only sacred, but is for me actually one of the easiest ways as a portal back into connection with the divine. When people come every day to satsang and ask, either in satsang or in personal conversations or other times, how do I connect with the divine? How do I find devotion? One of the answers that I always give is, if devotion to God with a name, with a form, in a particular religion isn't something that comes naturally to you, and you want to have devotion in your life, you want to have connection, but it's not coming naturally for you through any of these more traditional ways, go into nature, hug a tree, watch the sunrise, watch the sunset, watch the waves on the ocean, look at the stars in the night sky. You know, I share really frequently, actually, that for me, if I need kind of an immediate experience of sacred awe, I can get it on NASA's Instagram page. You know, just open it up and it's nebulas and it's galaxies. And it's like, oh my God, this exquisite perfection of the divine. How could we forget the perfection of that presence? How could we feel separate? How could we feel like it's all about me or my ego or my role or my story or my this or my that? Not only is it exquisite, but that which we're looking at, you know, when the James Webb telescope goes out and takes pictures and sends them back, that nebula, that's not even a picture of today. They're taking a picture today of something that existed millions of years ago. When you look at the night sky and the stars, you're not seeing how it looks today in 2026. It's like, oh, that star is giving me a glimpse of 500 years ago. That star is giving me a glimpse of 5 million years ago. Through the night sky, we are being granted a glimpse of the past. How it existed, but it's coming to us today. And for me, awe is one of the most powerful, accessible ways of re-remembering the pervasive, non-discriminatory presence of the divine. And it inspires us to protect this creation. Because while our particular actions are certainly not going to impact the nebulas, they are going to impact all of the exquisiteness of life on Earth. And they're going to impact the ability of our children and our grandchildren to see the nebulas, to see the galaxies, to see the sunrise, to see the sunset. And that's stealing. That's stealing and it's harm. So to protect and preserve is our moral duty and our spiritual duty.
Thank you for that. I think that's a beautiful way to end off our podcast. I mean, it's showing that reverence comes with being present and acknowledging and having that love, you know, for God's creation and seeing God in his creation as well. And that can only come if it starts with you, because when you connect to the love inside yourself, can you connect to the love in creation? And then comes that responsibility to want to protect that, and it turns into sacred action. So thank you for sharing that. I think it's very beautiful. I have been so happy to have this conversation with you. I could go on forever listening to you because there's so much spiritual wisdom that's been given. But also, I really felt the Divine Mother's presence today in our conversation. It really came out strong today. And I'm so grateful for this conversation and grateful to know you. And thank you so much for being here and sharing today.
So much love to you. I'm so happy to be able to be together with you, and so happy that our mutually beloved, amazing being of Dr. Aza brought us together back in Manresa, and that now we're able to be back together here today.
I'm also so grateful. And I
So
hope
much
we
love.
do get to meet again soon.
Much love.
Thank you.